Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, December 14th, 2023, and this meeting of the Advanced Plans Committee is called to order. Roll call, Deborah Foster is here, Chuck Warren, not here, Joe Johnson. Here. Hugh Nix, absent, Cindy Miles, absent, John McKay, here. Tony Zimmelman. Here. All right, we have a quorum of 4, and we will proceed. Yes, I do need approval of the November 30th, 2023 minutes. Are there any? No changes or corrections? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. McKay and a second by Mr. Zimmelman to approve the November 30th, 2023 minutes. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. We have a 4-0 approval. Okay, before we move on to item number 3, I do need to call for special meetings on January 25th, 2024 and February 22nd, 2024. We did not officially call for those the last time because they had not yet been approved on the MAPC calendar, but they are now called for. January 25, 2024 and February 22nd, 2024. So if y'all would please put those on your calendar, I would appreciate it. Yes, those we'll continue with the 2 a month instead of 1 a month through February. And hopefully that will be the end of it, but we'll see. It depends on how the solar energy situation proceeds. So let's move to item 3 on the agenda. And the recommended action is receive and file. Justin, staff report, please, on solar energy in the county moratorium.
Can you hear me now? Yes, okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Justin Constantino with the Planning Department. I guess I'll kick things off by kind of talking about the process, kind of where we are in terms of the schedule. Obviously, we had our meeting and we had some discussion on solar on our November 30th meeting. We did just basically provide some staff information, and the goal was to basically give you as much input that we've received from basically public comments, emails, the solar open house on November 16th. And then today, our goal is to review all of that data. You basically have 3 separate reports in your packet that includes the public input that we've received, input from the solar town hall event, and then input from the public survey. And then through this presentation, I will be going through each of those and we can kind of discuss the results together. So just this graphic here, I just kind of lifted off of the Sedgwick County presentation. As I mentioned before, solar open house is right here. And then we are right here. This would be our November 30th meeting, and we are currently reviewing everything today. So next slide, please. So this is kind of what we are trying to accomplish today. Like I mentioned before, we basically are taking input from several different sources. One would be public comments. The other would be from the town hall event. The other is from our public survey. And then staff is currently in the process of researching best practices. That includes what other communities are doing, as well as academic research from organizations like the American Planning Organization and Center for Rural Affairs, those types of organizations. The next slide, please. So just to give you a quick recap of the Solar Town Hall, I know we discussed this on November 30th, but for those folks that weren't in attendance or don't have the background, we held that event on November 14th. It was from 4:30 p.m. to 7 o'clock p.m. at the Sedgwick County Extension Office. We had quite a turnout. We had 78 individuals officially sign into the event, And I would say that we had about 12 staff members in attendance. Overall, I would say there was well over 100 people that did attend the event. So it was very well attended. We had a lot of turnout and we did receive a lot of feedback. Next slide, please. The layout of the town hall event itself, we had 13 stations. At each station was a different topic as it pertained to solar. So one station would be about size and configuration. Another one would be about glare and aviation. Another would be about the environment or groundwater. And basically, individuals that attended the meeting were tasked with taking Post-it notes, writing comments on those topics specifically, and then posting those Post-it notes on those boards. So the goal was to get feedback on those specific topics. We also had general comment cards available at the sign-in booth and throughout the venue. So those comment cards were more general in nature. They weren't topic specific. It was specifically to provide feedback on solar, provide feedback on the event. And then all that feedback that we received from the event, we combined it into one solar power town hall report that is available in your packet. So it's a pretty significant report in terms of all the feedback that we received. This includes the Post-it notes, the comment cards, as well as the public comment portion of the event, which took place from about 6 o'clock p.m. to 7 o'clock p.m. That was when individuals were able to stand up at the podium and voice concerns or voice their thoughts on solar, large-scale utility solar. Next slide, please. So this was, these are the results from everything that we were able to pull from the meeting itself. These were kind of the issues that were highlighted, things that people had concerns with, or people that that had questions about it, or they wanted to talk more about. Urban development and growth was probably the topic that came up the most. And when I say urban development and growth, I'm talking about the growth area around our area of influence. So 3 to 5 miles within, right outside the city. People were concerned about the location of large-scale utility solar, where it would be located, and that 3 to 5 mile number came up frequently in our research. So it was, I'm not necessarily opposed to solar or against it, but I want to make sure that it's located far enough outside of the city where there's more land. Decommissioning came in as a close second. People were very concerned about the longevity of large-scale utility solar and basically how that decommissioning process would work. There was a lot of questions about that. So that was the second item that received a lot of responses. Groundwater contamination, people were concerned about those large-scale utility solar systems being driven into the ground, how that would affect the water source. And then size and configuration was another topic that was very popular. And then finally, export of energy or perceived adverse local impacts. Where is the energy going? If they're building it here, is it going elsewhere? So those were kind of the 5 topics that came up that were the most popular.
Hey, Justin, can you describe a little bit about the process and how these were identified?
Sure. So we had staff members go through every single one of these comments. So we took every Post-it note that we received off the board, we transcribed them. We also took all the comment cards, scanned them in. Those are all available. And we transcribed all of those comment cards as well. And then the county, with the county communications department, we worked closely with them in developing transcripts from all those individuals that spoke at the podium. So all of that information verbatim is presented in your packet. So that is publicly available. It's available to you. I didn't want to go through every comment, obviously, this morning, but that is all there. So I appreciate that, Scott. Yeah.
And what I would add is what these represent then is we've taken those comments, we look through them, and whenever a particular topic would appear as part of that comment, we would essentially note that. And so after figuring out, okay, groundwater was represented in X number of comments, urban development and growth were indicated in X number of comments. That's how we arrived at these percentage of comments that we received that referred to those. Now Now, I would add too that there were general comments such as in favor of solar or not in favor of solar. And Justin, do you want to talk just a little bit about those?
Sure. And I'll get a little bit more into that with the public survey, but there were a lot of general comments that said no solar, or I'm in favor of solar, or really what we were trying to drive down to is the topics. The town hall is very different from the public survey, and that the town hall was a lot more general comment based. So it was a bit more broad, whereas the survey, the questions that we asked tended to be more specific. So as far as the town hall results and what you're seeing here, a lot of it was I'm opposed to solar, but I'm concerned about decommissioning, or I'm for solar and I'm concerned about decommissioning. So the goal was to identify themes throughout that process.
And just one more quick comment is when it comes to urban development and growth, where the comments, does that represent comments only about the city of Wichita growth area, or does it represent comments that could pertain to the growth areas of all the cities in Sedgwick County?
It would be the latter. So it's basically our entire area of influence, I would say. Next slide, please. So shifting gears to the survey, as I mentioned before, we held our event on the 14th. The survey was available from November 16th through the 28th. The survey basically addressed those same general categories that were on the boards themselves at the Solar Town Hall event. Where the survey sort of differed from the general comment feel of the town hall event was we asked specific questions. So we would say, should the regulations as they currently exist regarding glare and aviation remain the same or change? And then the next question would be regarding does the current regulations in relation to size and configuration, should those stay the same or should they change? So we were looking for a very specific same, change, or general comment, basically. So we did release the survey. We got a lot of feedback. There were 154 participants. And that full report, that full survey report is available in your packet. So you can see every question that was asked and literally every response that came in. As I mentioned before, there's 154 participants. So it's a lot of information, but each category basically will show at least 154 comments there. So it's a pretty thick packet, but I will distill a lot of that information for you on the next few slides, which let's move ahead. Next slide, please. So this is sort of how the sausage is made. This is kind of what Scott was mentioning before of how staff sort of distilled these comments down. We did read through every single comment that we received on the survey. And basically we were looking at themes. We were trying to determine what people were concerned about, what people had questions on, and we read through every single comment as staff and noted what those were. So we were able to take those 11 categories, break those out, and then if obviously there were any other concerns or any other topics that came up, or if there was something that we didn't mention, we certainly noted that. So it was a somewhat rigorous process, but I think we got a lot of really good information out of it. Next slide, please. So these are the results. Now, when you're looking at these results, these are the topics that came up most frequently. So what you can see here, it says setbacks 14%, decommissioning 13%. Those, to be clear, are not to be taken as a whole. So when it says setbacks 14%, that doesn't mean that 14% of all comments that we received were about setbacks. So one of the trends that we noticed when going through those public survey results was that about 55% to 60% of the individuals surveyed said that they wanted to have our regulations stay the same. So what that means is, as I mentioned before, when we broke down those individual topics and we said, do you think that our glare and aviation standards are the same? Should they be changed? 60%, 55 to 60% of the respondents on just about every single category said, keep them the same. And then the remaining 40% is what is reflected on this slide here. I would say it's a combination of people saying either change the regulations or just a general comment. So take that for what it is. This is about 40% of the comments here saying that they would like to see either a change or I just have a general comment or a general question regarding setbacks and decommissioning. So you will see a lot of the same topics listed on this slide that we saw come out in the open house. So setbacks was a big concern, how far or how close large-scale utility solar can be located from a specific property line. Decommissioning, again, was a very important topic, a very prevalent topic. Urban development and growth area was big. And then wildlife, groundwater, those were certainly big topics. And then less regulations was a big topic that sort of came up. Was of that 40% that didn't say keep the regulations the same, that group said, well, maybe we should have some less regulations. Pro-wind, despite the fact that this is not necessarily pertaining to solar, that did come up in one specific area. We had a topic on the comprehensive plan that said, shall we keep the comprehensive plan? Any language that's in the comprehensive plan currently regarding solar, shall we keep that the same or should we change it? And that was really the only category that sort of swayed one way, where, as before I mentioned, that 60%, 55 to 60% said keep them the same. Wind was a big topic for some reason on the comprehensive plan, mainly because the comprehensive plan currently does not allow wind turbines in Sedgwick County, and people were like, hey, why not? Let's change that. So, and then rounding out kind of some other concerns: glare, soil quality, natural habitat and plantings, and then fire protection. If for some reason one of these facilities were to catch fire, is the fire services in those areas adequate? Next slide, please. So what we decided to do was to kind of get these themes all on one page and kind of show you and rank those. So as you can see on this slide, it's town hall to the left, on the survey to the right, and those are ranked in order. So from the town hall meeting, as you can see, as I mentioned before, urban development and growth, very hot topic. Decommissioning was a hot topic as well. And then you're starting to see some crossover a little bit in the survey results. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what we tried to do was sort of highlight where we're starting to see some of those similarities. So obviously, as I mentioned before, urban development and growth, a pretty big topic when it comes to both the town hall and the survey. Decommissioning is there as well. Groundwater contamination, a big concern. So one thing that I would like to mention on this is that, again, just to reiterate, at the town hall, we had 80 plus sign-ins, and then on the survey we had 154 participants. So definitely a lot of feedback and a lot of really good information. We'll go to the next slide, please. So again, taking those the information that we received, we distilled it down to these 4 themes, being the themes that came up the most, the themes that we kind of want to discuss today and sort of open up conversation amongst everyone in attendance, is to see how we feel about those. I think the goal would be next for staff to do a little bit more research, look at best practices on those. But basically, I would like to open up the floor, 1 for questions, but 2, general discussion on these 4 items to see how you all feel about it, and again, answer any questions about the survey, the town hall event, or any of the research that we've done thus far.
And this is Kirk Sponsel, Deputy County Councilor. I'm hopping in just because this seems like a good stopping point for Justin here. And I just want to caution and clarify to the council, or to the commission, I don't know that we've delved thoroughly into this, but I just want to caution and clarify some of the documents that have been submitted within the packet or for your review. They do contain comments associated with specific projects or locations. I just want to verify that while they may have been said and they may be in your materials, that doesn't mean that you should be analyzing specific situations. What you have before you is more of a legislative action. This is more of policy considerations. So the review of the regulations should be as how they are applied to the county as a whole. We shouldn't be necessarily delving down into specific properties or applications. Zeroing in on specific properties might change the nature of the overall analysis and would have additional due process implications. So as such, I would just advise you keep this broadly. How do these potential regulations apply to the county as a whole? As a whole, what should we be looking at in terms of these commercial solar applications? Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. I will just make one comment and try to skid past Kirk's comment in the process. At the workshop, the open house, which I attended, I think urban development and growth was as high on the list there because there was a significant contingent from Colwich who were primarily interested in the growth area of Colwich not having solar in it. So it may be more heavily represented. I think probably the level of interest that showed up in the online survey might be a little more accurate for community-wide interest in the topic. It is important, but I don't know that it's necessarily number one in our concern list. Anyone else on the board have any comments? Don't speak up all at once. Could you turn on your mic, please?
When we talk about decommissioning, we're talking about at the end of life of the collectors and who's responsible for getting rid of them. And is that,
Yes, sir, that's correct.
yeah, it's a big concern.
Well, you can tell us it's a big concern. We can tell you that it came up in comments that we received in both the information. Relative, whether it's a big or a small or not a concern, we're looking to you all for feedback on that.
Was my comment.
Yeah, John?
Going back to your comment about don't be so specific, how can you possibly write a program that's going to be encompassive of everything and do to everybody? I think, whether it be the development world or whatever it is, it's pretty specific of what the areas and where you're going. And I'll just use the Colwich because it was mentioned. The Colwich situation is that people are saying, we do not want these around here because whether it be growth or whatever it might be. So I would think that, and then you go maybe over to Andale, which is 3 or 4 miles further away, and they said, well, sure, that's fine. It's going to help us with our growth.
Yeah, and I think I would point out to the current regulations as an example. What the current regulations say is you have a list that's laid out within our unified zoning code that have broad applications. So for example, I think there's a requirement that they have to submit site plans with certain requirements. There are requirements that people have to interact with public works, verify the roads that might potentially be impacted. There are general conversations about environmental impacts. And so I think this analysis is looking at those current regulations and saying, hey, broadly speaking, are there things that we should also be looking for as well for every application that comes forward in the future? Or are there some circumstances in which, we might need to tweak or reduce existing regulations? So it's just kind of those broad brushstrokes.
Yeah, and I would add for particular locations, because these are conditional uses, there will be opportunities to adjust if there are additional conditions that need to be added for given the particular circumstances of an application.
On groundwater contamination, can you give me an example, or is there documented cases of how solar has contaminated groundwater?
So I don't think we have any documented cases on it. I just think that these are the results from the survey and what people were generally concerned about. I think it was one of those things where as solar is constructed and stakes are driven into the ground, at least that's what that's the general concern of what that is, whether there's some sort of groundwater contamination correlated with that. But as far as actual studies, we don't have that.
So you don't have never heard of a case that this happened, or how did this come up, I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure. I think at this point, what we can say is that we've seen this theme kind of emerge from multiple comments that have been submitted, and it's one of the themes that kind of rises to the top in terms of number of times that it comes up. Our next steps then from this, if you think that these are the themes and things that represent the public comments, if you feel like this accurately represents what the public sentiment is, then what we can do is we will look at these, what we have currently in place, also what best practices are, and we will delve more into the specific comments to find out more distinctly what it is that people are happy with our groundwater comment requirements that are in the code, or is it that they're not happy about it and they want to see a particular change? And we'll try and identify, kind of delve into it to figure out what we're seeing from the public. So
Scott,
yeah.
what you're saying is that groundwater contamination has not been debunked. I mean, it's just a concern that somebody's brought up.
If I could cut in, I think what I would say is, I think Scott Wadle himself doesn't have the answer right now, but more information might be gathered on the topic.
From what I recall from people saying at the open house, they were worried about in areas of very shallow groundwater when the racks for the solar panels, the posts for the racks were driven into the ground, whether they would be either wooden and have some sort of preservative on them, or be galvanized metal, and the galvanized coating would possibly contaminate groundwater. Those were the specific comments. In my personal opinion, I think from a technological perspective and knowing what the groundwater depth is, I think it should be possible to write regulations that would address those concerns. But those were the concerns I heard expressed. How am I doing, Kurt? Am I being general enough? Okay, so that was the groundwater thing. And the decommissioning, I agree. In the back of my mind were the gigantic industrial areas up along 21st Street that the whole taxpayer base ended up dealing with. And I don't want to see that happen. But again, I think there should be ways to write the regulations to, I don't know whether you put a trust fund in or what, but something. So, okay. And setbacks, I remember one person standing up and just basically saying, they're ugly and I don't want to look at them. So, which is, a factor, but again, as I've expressed multiple times in our subdivision, when people don't want infrastructure where they can see it, we all benefit from infrastructure, and I think we all need to take our share of the, visual clutter that sometimes results. It can't all be shoved into low-income neighborhoods where other people don't have to look at it, and I don't think that's fair. So, I think the setbacks need to be reasonable, but I don't think we need to make them crazy, in my personal opinion.
I think the distinction is that solar may be something new to the scene, whereas if you build a house and there's a vacant land next to it, what you said, I entirely agree with. But solar's come about, I think, kind of fast on us, and I think it needs to be looked at.
Okay, any other comments from board members? Justin, do you have more to tell us, or is this our?
That's pretty much the end. I think overall, we're just looking for general consensus that you find it acceptable that staff proceed doing further research on these 4 topics on the screen here. Again, these were the little words that were the most commonly seen both in the survey and at the town hall event. So as long as you guys are comfortable with us proceeding on further research on these particular topics, we can certainly do that.
I'd make that motion.
We don't need a motion actually, but I think is anybody in disagreement that staff should with these? Okay.
One
Scott?
quick note is that you're not just limited to these. If you feel like there are others, you could add them to the list. And even later on in the process, others, if they emerge, we can do research. But part of the challenge that we face, I don't know if it's a challenge or just part of the environment that we're operating in, is that with the moratorium ending in March and knowing the amount of lead time that it takes to get an item on the county commission agenda and the amount of lead time to get it to the planning commission, we just don't have a lot of time to keep conducting research. So these are the ones that we're at in order, and we'll do the research on this and plan to stay on that schedule. But if there's additional ones, we can certainly work towards that as well too.
Bearing in mind, we're talking about basically commercial solar. We're not talking about residential scale solar, which is a whole nother, yes, which I'm sure you'll get to eventually.
And I would also encourage you to consider public comment at this time too, so you can get some perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That was my intent. All right. Justin, if you're finished, do we have any members of the public that are here who would like to speak on this item? If you, yes, please come up to the podium and speak into the microphone. First, give us your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Tim Mullen. I live at 6718 North 135th Street West in Colwich. I have just one question for Justin. Of the 154 online survey questions, are you able to determine how many are local, in other words, Sedgwick County residents, and how many of them are outside of the area? Because, Commission, I think it's important that we look at what the county residents are asking about, not necessarily what the rest of the world is wanting us to go do. So I would ask of you to take a more serious look at what probably the open house results were, because that's actually residents of Sedgwick County that were in attendance. Well, most of the folks there were all resident members of Sedgwick County. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker from commission members? And I don't think so, so thank you. Is there any member of the public? All right, name and address, please. 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mark Brady. I'm an attorney with the Polson Elliott Law Firm, and my address is 121 Webster Woods Drive, St. Louis, Missouri. My comments are going to be very, very brief and introductory, and I do want to commend, I was present at the town hall meeting too, and I do want to commend staff. I thought it was a very, very well-run event. And I also appreciate the fact, staff and this commission as well, that the effort that they're going through to solicit information on various topics that have emerged and that are important to the community, and from a variety of sources, explore best practices that are deployed in other communities, and just the real willingness to consider information from a variety of sources. As part of that effort, I do know that there was some written material submitted to staff on a number of topics, and there were a number of speakers here today that would be in a position to kind of amplify those written comments and hopefully engage in a dialogue and perhaps some question and answer with these experts on a couple of the topics that have emerged as being recognized as important by the community and the staff and the commission. And so with that, I know there's going to be a couple other speakers on those particular topics, and I'm certainly prepared to answer any questions that you would have as well. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? I would note, I may be opening myself up here, there is a 3-minute limit per speaker, but if someone on the commission asks questions, that limit extends. So, thank you. And is there someone else, some other member of the public who would like to speak? Name and address, please, first.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Chris Olson. I live at 49 Valridge Drive in Ancaster, Ontario, Canada. I have a PhD in environmental health sciences, and over the last 15 years have done extensive work in reviewing public health and safety aspects of renewable energy projects, wind projects, solar projects, and the like. In fact, the first time I was in Kansas was wind project about 14 years ago, and I'm in the state probably 6-7 times a year on wind and solar projects. So I've been asked to come and, specifically speak today to groundwater. I did submit a letter through Mr. Waddle earlier this week that you have, brief letter report, and then the question comes up with groundwater. And we're seeing this more and more now that you've got community concerns around solar panels that can toxic material from panels leach into the soil and groundwater, and or Madam Chair, as you suggested, by having galvanized steel poles for the racking system, is that something to how impact groundwater? Where does the concern come from? Honestly, it comes from the internet. And it comes, if you Google solar panel groundwater contamination, you're going to get a whole host of non-scientific references suggesting that you get leaching material from these panels or from galvanized steel into the groundwater impacting health. It's actually not the case. But where it comes into is that if you want it, so the solar panels themselves, constructed of the aluminum frame, you've got the glass material, you've got embedded material within those panels, all then just like your cell phone, right? So what you're carrying around here in your pocket every day contains a fair concentration of what we would consider toxic metals: zinc, arsenic, lead, cadmium, chromium, etc. But it's all contained within your phone, similar to the solar panels themselves. At the end of life, before you were to landfill, let's say, a solar panel, that's where you're going to go. Not suggesting you should, but if you do want to do that, you have to crush up the solar panels, put them through a leachate, like an acid test, to see whether or not those materials come out. That's entirely different than normal operations of the groundwater. We're happy to provide additional details if the committee wants to have, the further scientific information behind this that will show and indicate that, yes, normal operations, even if a solar panel's cracked, let's say there's a big hailstorm that comes through, you get some cracking and damage of panels, the material that's in there, the lead, the chromium, the copper, some of the stuff that's in the solder and that other materials, do not leach from the panels into soil or groundwater. They do not impact local area, and you're not going to see that contamination go further than that. Some of the other issues beyond the groundwater issue that we've heard, the glint and glare issue, you already have that within your regulation, certainly easy and already addressed with. So, happy to answer any questions that you might have on this, or certainly can provide further information to the commission if you'd like in future on this issue.
All right, thank you. Questions from the commission? Tony?
Thank you for the explanation, but are there materials that we know of that we could build these out of that wouldn't harm the water?
So already the materials that you do have are not going to be harming the water. So if you think about, first of all, the racking system, right? So the poles that they're mounted on, they can be a number of different steel material, but they do tend to be galvanized steel, right? It's the same type of material that you're using in fence posts all around Wichita here, right? So all of those chain link fences that folks have in their backyard, when they push those in, galvanized steel, right? The road barriers as you're driving down the highway, and that all galvanized steel is basically ubiquitous throughout our environment and building. And there's, can there be some material come off that galvanized steel over 30, 40, 50 years? Yes, but it's very locally, right in the soil. So if I was to measure the soil concentration of zinc, it's a zinc issue there. If I was to measure the zinc soil concentration prior to putting, whether it's a racking system for a solar project or your fence in your backyard, measure before, and then let's say 30 years later, measure it again, I might, and emphasizing might, find a small increase in zinc in there, but certainly nothing that would be toxic. Zinc is actually an essential element. So to give you some appreciation for that, when you go and have your daily vitamin, you're getting tens of thousands of times more zinc in your daily vitamin than you ever would from groundwater, and because it's an essential element. So, and if you look at groundwater standards for zinc, for example, if you took the groundwater standard for arsenic, and you take the groundwater standard for zinc, you're 1,000,000 times greater for zinc than you are arsenic, because it's something that we need in our body. So you could not possibly contaminate the soil or groundwater in the area to any extent that would pose a risk to either people or the environment in that case. For the panels themselves, again, they're made out of, mostly it's silicone. It's a silicone-based, material. You have glass on top of it, and you've got the aluminum racking. In, let's say, the solder joints, you will have some lead, a little bit of lead in the solder joints. You may have a little bit of copper within the wiring of the facility. But again, nothing, all very trace amounts, nothing that is going to leach from the panels themselves. So even if I took, and again, much higher concentration of my cell phone or the iPad up here or the computer screen, and it, most of us, the screens seem to be getting better, but back a couple of years ago, I couldn't help but just look at the thing and it would crack. Even if you were to take that thing, and my kids have gone through more screens than I can count. Even if you were to take your cell phone when it's cracked like that and you left it out in the weather and you were to leave it there in the rain for the next year and snow and everything else, come back, you're not going to find anything around it because all that material is embedded within the components themselves. It's the same thing with the solar panels. So even if they're cracked or damaged, now if they get cracked or damaged, The folks who are running the solar farm go out and replace those panels fairly quickly because they need the power. But even if they were to be left there, just sitting out in the rain and the snow and the elements for years, material's not coming out of it. The concern is really if you're going to landfill panels and you're going to get some acidic conditions in the landfill over the course of 100 years, so would some of that material potentially leach out? And that's really where kind of this basis came from. But we know that under normal operating conditions, even under extreme weather conditions, whether it's the poles for the mounts or the panels themselves, there's nothing that is going to leach from that and impact soil and groundwater. So you quite simply don't need to do groundwater. In fact, it would be a waste of money to install a groundwater monitoring system. We have seen some counties kind of start to contemplate that. The reality is it's a very, to do it similar to a landfill, for example. Any of your landfills here have an extensive groundwater monitoring program around the landfill that has to be tested at least once a year, if not twice a year, looking to see whether or not stuff is coming out of that landfill into groundwater. That is absolutely appropriate. We've been doing that for decades to make sure that we're not then impacting local water quality. For something like this, if you were to put a groundwater system in for a problem that doesn't exist, you're talking, this isn't a couple $1,000s, you tend to talk in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. It's not needed and it doesn't afford any better protection for health. So I think in the letter, I've given you some other references from Ohio Department of Health has examined the issue. There's a couple other government agencies that I gave you for references. So we can certainly happily provide more if this is a topic that the committee wants to look at to back up just what I'm saying here today to you.
All right, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, Chris, where are you located?
Yeah, I'm out of Toronto, Canada, basically, but I spend most of my time here in the Midwest these days. So I was earlier in the week, I was in Illinois on a solar project there. So
I'm sorry, where'd you say Toronto?
Toronto.
Oh,
yeah.
All right, I have a question. So what is, I'm switching topics to decommissioning.
Sure.
So what is the current state of the art for safely decommissioning solar? And as part of that, is the technology changing fast enough so that the solar panels will get switched out before the end of life of the whole structure?
Sure.
And is the methodology for disposing safely of solar panels changing particularly fast that what you tell us now will be obsolete really quick, or do we have a while?
Sure, and I'll let the solar developers that are in the room talk to you about the changing out of panels and the technology on that end. In terms of disposal, you're allowed to dispose of solar panels in landfills, all right? And quite frankly, and so what I would say, you do that TCLP or T-clip, the toxic leaching that you have to do for any other test of putting material in a landfill. But for the most part, you can safely you can safely dispose of solar panels in landfills. That's fine when we're talking 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. When, if you look at Kansas, right, you folks even have a couple little small community solar projects around here, 1 megawatt, give or take. That's a few panels. It's not a big deal. When we're talking about projects in the 100, not to speak to any one project, but now we're talking, I haven't worked on a solar project that's under 100 megawatts in the last 3 years or so. Most of them are the 200, 300, 400 megawatt zone. We're talking now hundreds of thousands of panels per project. What's happened over, I'd say, the last 5 years, the industry has grown up where, you do have projects in California and Arizona where you're getting close to the end of life of those projects and they are going to have to be disposed of, okay? And then you have panels that'll break, let's say during construction or whatever, you got to dispose. In a perfect world, it would be great, all 400,000 panels go up, they're all perfect, but that never is the case. So let's say you've got a dozen panels that are broken during construction. There is now a recycling industry that has grown up and is continuing to expand around this industry. There's now, give or take, I think it's about, give or take 10 companies across the US that do have disposable facilities for recycling. So you can take that material, it does cost more than landfilling, okay? And you can take that material, it can now be recycled. The recycling, what they do is they strip out all the aluminum around the solar panels themselves. They reuse that. They then strip out the glass and the silicon so that they could reuse the glass. And then the other components sometimes get chipped up for road use material or whatever have you. I think what we're going to see is, and you do have some states that have moved towards, or some counties that have moved towards a recycling mandate within regulation. I think the reality is if you look at it, you don't have a project here yet, a large-scale solar project. If you were to have one in Sedgwick County, you're looking at that kind of 20-year plus until such time those panels would have to be removed and then recycled or disposed of. I think we're going to find at that point, the regulations will have shifted towards mandating recycling, but you can safely landfill panels. The challenge to landfilling panels is that the volume is going to be too much. So it's not a toxicity issue or an environmental issue from oh no, what's going to happen to these panels in 100 years? It's simply a volume issue. If you can imagine trying to put 400,000 panels in a landfill, you're going to be building new landfills for panels. So I think one way or another, they can be handled safely. And certainly if you wanted somebody to talk about how long life of panels and switch out, I think somebody else could probably better address that.
Right, thank you. Joe?
Can I go back and comment again about decommissioning? My concern was the ownership structure of these fields and what happens if they don't prove out successfully and they just walk away from them?
Sure, and I again, that's better, like I'm on the health and safety side, it's better for one of the company representatives could maybe come now or after I'm done, whichever you'd prefer, committee.
I think we'll save that for
Yeah,
something more
okay,
appropriate.
sure.
Any more environmental issues that anybody wants to address? Is glare in your bailiwick?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is. So certainly, what happened with the glare issue is that back about 10 years ago, the FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, because of our major airports, are putting solar panels all around them, right? You've got that dead space around the runways, you can't build anything. So all of a sudden, now most major airports now, and even some of the smaller airports, are putting solar panels all around the airport's lands. Back about 10, maybe 12 years ago, the FAA worked with one of the national laboratories to develop a glare model because they were worried about the pilots coming in the flight path, right? And so would glare off the panels, cause the temporary blindness in the pilots that would cause them to, go off the runway. And the other part was for those folks working in the towers, right? So you've got the tower and you've got the tower controllers, the air controllers. They developed the model for that reason. And then what happened was the FAA realized, okay, this isn't actually an issue for the pilots flying over. There might be a little bit of glare as the pilots are coming in. It is not going to be to the point where it causes any aviation issue, but you still have to do it for those in the tower because those folks might be looking down at a runway, dealing with runway control issues, and you certainly don't want them getting a lot of glare off. And what glare really is, so if you think about, we've all looked into the sun a little too long and you get those spots in your eyes, or you're driving down the road and it's really sunny out, you can't get the visor there and it's kind of beaten off. That's kind of the glare that we're talking about. Solar panels, the way that they're designed is, of course, designed to absorb the light, right? They're meant to keep in all of that energy and the like. And so really there's only about maybe 2% of that light can be re-emitted from the panels. In recent years, those models for the aviation models have been used to do roadway and neighboring homes to make sure that you don't somehow set up the panels so that if, grandma's house is across the street next door, you don't want her getting glare off those panels all day long. It's not really a health issue, it's just more of an annoyance issue. So that can be done. And I believe that your existing ordinance already has a requirement for doing that modeling within it. What I can tell you is that having looked at dozens of the solar projects, really the glare from the panels to the roadway or motor vehicles to neighboring houses is not an issue. It invariably, the modeling gets done, comes back. It does not tend to be an issue just because of the way the panels are oriented and the fact that they absorb the light. If somehow you do get concerned that, let's say over a certain stretch of roadway, you might have glare too much from the panels, you can put in vegetative cover. And you can do some other things. So there's ways that it can be mitigated, or they can tilt the panels slightly differently. So really was certainly an airport issue. And then a bunch of the modelers said, hey, we can use this for roadways, let's do it. But at the end of the day, I think what your existing ordinance has is sufficient to cover you. That on any individual project coming before you, they'll bring their glare analysis to the county. And then you'll be able to review that glare analysis to make sure that it's sufficient for the purposes of the roadways in any individual project.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just
All
have a
right.
general comment. After that fantastic presentation by Chris, I don't know if we're prioritizing these 4 items, but I certainly would move setbacks ahead of groundwater. spending a lot of time
And-
proportionally on the order.
Okay, and I would say, thank you for that feedback, and we will look to the group as a whole to determine what the priority order should be, but thank you for the comment.
All right, thank you, Scott. All right, do we have any other public speakers? Please come up, or, well, which one? You two decide. Name and address, please, and you have 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Madam Chair, for having me up here and giving me the opportunity to speak to the committee today. Name's Mitch Lucas, from 270 South Perry Street in Denver, Colorado. So first time speaking in front of the committee, so just a little bit about me. I'm a project developer. I work for Invenergy, and I do energy project development kind of across the state of Kansas. So similar to Mr. Olson, I'm spending a lot of time in the state as well. But I know Mr. Johnson and others had some questions around decommissioning, so I just kind of wanted to give the board a flavor for, from the perspective of a solar developer, what does the decommissioning process look like and what kind of protections do you have in place? And so there's really 3 things that I'd focus on. I think, number one, most importantly, the existing Sedgwick County solar ordinance requires that the applicant provide a decommissioning plan along with their application package. So if we were to submit a conditional use permit application in the county, that's something that we would have to provide as a part of our application package that would flesh out exactly what the decommissioning of the facility would look like. But beyond that, 2 things that are really part of our standard approach. So in the state of Kansas, if you're developing a solar or a wind project, it is customary for the developer to negotiate what's called a decommissioning agreement with whoever the permitting body is. And similar to the plan that is required for a Sedgwick County applicant, it'll stipulate exactly what the decommissioning of the facility will look like. And as a part of that decommissioning agreement, it is standard to provide some kind of financial assurance, so that if the operator of the facility goes away for some reason, that the funds will be available to make sure that the infrastructure is removed appropriately. And then kind of lastly, the third thing is that before we apply for a conditional use permit, before we're ever in negotiations with the county on a decommissioning agreement, the leases that we sign with our landowners, that also lines out exactly our obligations on the back end to remove the infrastructure. So we've got that bilateral agreement with the landowners as well. So there's really 3 layers of protection in that regard.
All right, thank you. So both a civil and I'm going in the wrong direction, never mind. All right, are there any questions from the commission for our speaker? All right, so what happens if you say there's some protection in place, but how does that work? Is it a trust financially if the company gets bought out by some other company that doesn't want to meet the obligations? How does that work over the long-term 20, 30-year time span we're looking at?
That's a great question. So when we develop a project, there's really 2 directions that we can take it. So, the developer might be interested in owning and operating that facility, or it could be sold to a major utility company once it's been built for them to operate and own. But that decommissioning agreement with the county, for example, will be negotiated in the name of the project. So it's going to follow the project, no matter who owns it. And the most common, the second part of the question, most common instrument that I'm familiar with would be a decommissioning bond that would be posted.
Sorry, okay, thank you, that helps. Mr. Johnson?
And we have great attorneys.
The best.
Yeah, watch yourself in the
thank
Clinton.
you.
Okay, so that's decommissioning, setbacks, urban development and growth. What happens if an existing facility ends up with residential growing around it, or commercial, how do these facilities over the long term interact with additional development around them? Does it cause problems with the solar, or does it cause problem with the neighbors in your experience? Or do the people developing know what they're getting into and just deal with it?
I guess not sure I totally understand the question. Would it hurt the electrical generation capacity of the facility, or is that?
Yeah, if we're talking about urban growth areas for some of the smaller rural communities in Sedgwick County, and they're concerned that having one of these facilities is basically going to stop all development from moving in the direction anywhere near the solar facility. In your experience, does that happen, or is it more a case of the development just adjusting to be compatible with the solar facility over the next 20 years? Does that clarify?
Yes, that's helpful. So I think, the way that we view the facility is that it is, a long-term use of the land, typically several decades, but ultimately it is a temporary use. So, that's to say that once the facility reaches end of life and the infrastructure is removed from the ground via the ways that we just talked about, that land, so we lease our land, long-term leases with landowners, so they retain the ownership, and once the infrastructure is gone from the facility, the land would go back to the landowner. And they really have the leeway to do whatever they want to do with it, whether that's returning to agricultural production, or if, the needs of the community dictate, commercial, industrial, more residential development, then the landowner would be able to pursue those avenues as well.
Thank
Deborah, you brought up an interesting point. If as development moves out, does the solar property owner have a right to object to the development next to it? What if I want to build a high-rise next to it?
I'm having trouble picturing that, considering, I don't know that there are any high rises out in rural Sedgwick
I'm
County,
asking
but I do see the point,
Do they
yeah.
have a right to protest rezoning?
Kirk Sponsel, Deputy County Councilor. I mean, I think the question is potential developments around any future solar facilities, is that correct? I mean, that's individual property rights that you can protest and testify against or in favor of developments next to you. I mean, that's kind of personal property rights at that point.
Yeah, they would have standing. They could come before us and protest it.
Well, per state statute, it would be the property owner that would have to do it. So if the company is leasing the land, it would have to be the property owner who actually comes. Now, anyone can come forward and provide public testimony or comments about a case or an application.
But it would be the owner of the property.
Owner of the property for protest purposes, per the Kansas state statutes.
Okay, so is that something the solar companies worry about particularly? Or is the nature of the beast that they're out in rural areas where it's very unlikely there's going to be enough development around them to start blocking sunlight?
I think we wouldn't be too excited to see a skyscraper go up across the street from the project. But you're absolutely right. I think the areas that are, most typical for solar development, you're probably not going to see that, at least in our lifetimes.
I assume the solar companies would have agreements with the owner to be able to represent themselves.
I don't know, but I think we'll let them worry about that. Okay, any more questions for our speaker? All right, John.
Going back to what you were talking about,
Excuse me, John, can you move your mic a little? Thank you.
I think that I don't have anything to do with the solar at this point in time, but they have leases with the people and the landowner gets an override on everything anyhow. So I don't know why that would be an issue.
Well, I was only thinking that the solar company may want the landowner to do something he didn't want to do. Protect him. Let's get off that. It's kind of.
Yeah, I think we're down the rabbit hole here. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your testimony.
They're always the things that come back to bite you, however.
Yeah. All right. Next, please. Name and address and 3 minutes.
I feel
Start
like I
asking
need a
questions.
stepping stool over here. We've got a tall group over there. I'm the one that balances everything out. Good morning, everybody. My name is Meredith Abdu. My address is 1827 South Colt Court, Denver, Colorado. I work with Mitch for Invenergy and appreciate the time to come in today to talk to you all and appreciate the questions that we've gotten so far. I do, we really do think the discussion is a big piece in making sure we understand what the concerns are and trying to address those. So a couple things that I do want to talk about tied to some previous questions. One thing is how does the solar impact kind of future development? One of the things we see is a lot of folks in industry is looking for new renewable energies. Some of them are. And so a lot of times that's an attraction to folks because people will say, do you have those sources in your county, in your community? And so that can be used as to help bolster marketing for future development for industrial, commercial, et cetera. I think the other thing too, as far as how does it impact other areas, residential in particular, one of the things that in the current ordinance, there is language around potential vegetative screening and what that would look like. We do have a vegetation manager here today who will also speak to that to make sure any questions are answered there. But we do think that we can minimize those impacts, and we do think that bringing solar into the area can also help bolster growth as well. The other two things I want to try and address quickly here in a minute and a half, I can quickly see it ticking away there, is urban development and growth and setbacks. We have provided a memo to the commission, and that does walk through some of the implications of what we've seen. Thank you to Scott and Justin for providing the summary. What we heard, especially on the areas of urban influence, was a 3 to 5 mile setback was what was brought up during some of that public feedback, public comment. In that memo that we have submitted, it does walk through the implications of putting that in place. That would take out 84% of the county land to be eligible for development. So just when we think about the scale and the impact to the county, the impact to property rights of landowners and being able to decide what they want to do with their land, those setbacks are significant and would absolutely hinder the growth of solar in the county. The other thing I want to talk about is just general setbacks. So I know, Mr. Sponsel, we are trying to stay away from project specifics, but we have, put in there specifics on our project just as an illustration, because as Mr. McKay mentioned, sometimes you have to look at the specifics. The setbacks that we've seen proposed in the public comment.
But I am permitted under our bylaws to give you 2 more minutes, so can we say 2?
Okay, I think I should be able to finish in less
Thank
than that. So the setbacks that we have seen proposed as a part of the public comment, that would take out 38% of our proposed project. And so just walking back on what that means, we have agreements in place, and they've been in place for 5 years to deliver a certain amount of energy at a particular point on the grid, at a particular substation. And in that case, if the setbacks are to increase, what that does is that removes the area that we can build in and has kind of a counter effect. It would actually cause us to increase the project size substantially as far as from a project footprint. Because if you increase the setbacks, that means we can't build in those areas. That means we need additional land to meet a fixed project capacity. So let me know if that doesn't make any sense, but I can walk through that in more detail.
All right, any questions? I have one. So there's the urban development growth ring, which I think is kind of a separate topic, but the setbacks from a solar energy perspective, these solar panels are on racks. If you're talking vegetative screening, which is trees, how far away do the screening trees need to be away from the solar panels to make sure they don't impact their efficiency, roughly?
Ms. Foster, that's a great question, and we have the right man to answer it. It is not, but it is not me. I cannot, so can we table that question, or would you rather him
Absolutely.
come up?
We can, no, we'll pick your brain first, so. Okay, so Urban, you had a question, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I thought up another stupid question. How do you feel about cell towers?
Are they compatible or incompatible, or you don't care?
I don't think that's my decision to make, is what I would say. I think that it's just the same as this project. It depends on what the county has decided, what they have in their regulations. And I think you have to go through the process, which is exactly what we're doing here, is looking at the existing regulations. Are they sufficient? And making sure that we have public comment. So apologies for my non-answer.
That's okay. We have other brains to pick later. Okay. Any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you. And do we have another public speaker, I believe? Are you the last one? I'm just, do we have hands of more people? Okay. All right, name and address, please, in 3 minutes.
My name is Dr. David Loomis. I am in 2705 Colby Court in Bloomington, Illinois, and I'm president of Strategic Economic Research. I recently retired after 26 years as a professor of economics at Illinois State University. I do have PhD in economics and helped found our Center for Renewable Energy at Illinois State University and founded a renewable energy major at the university. I've been studying the economic impacts of renewable energy for the last 15 years, published numerous articles and peer-reviewed literature on this. So I want to address this topic of urban development and growth. And just to say there are significant economic benefits, economic development benefits that come with solar. Oftentimes people will focus just on the direct construction jobs or direct permanent operations jobs, but in a project of substantial size, you would have additional benefits that would flow to the local community because of the spending that'll happen. Typically, a solar project is going to be on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars, and at least some of that will get spent in the local area in terms of supply chain. That could be hotels, restaurants, and things for out-of-state workers, but many of the construction workers could be coming from the local community. There's also millions of dollars that are paid in property taxes. And while you look at alternatives to this in terms of residential and commercial development that would also pay property taxes, it's important to look and compare on an apples to apples basis, because residential development also requires significant services, government services, that would go along with that. Think of residential development. There's going to be additional costs to educate students that live in those homes. And solar projects can really be a tool for business attraction. Burns and McDonald, a site selection firm, talks about the significance of renewable energy being sought out for firms that want to locate businesses.
Sorry, you're running out of time. Let me just go ahead and give you the 2 minutes and hope that will be enough.
Thank you. Their exact quote is booming market demand for energy, particularly renewable energy, is significantly affecting the infrastructure expectations under consideration for development. Most notable is the approximately 14-fold increase in the average anticipated demand for electric power. And some companies consider co-locating near, at or near the project site. And I was in Missouri yesterday and talking to the Missouri Partnership. That's a public-private partnership doing economic development across the state of Missouri. And the comment from the director there said that every large public company is looking for 100% renewable energy to power their new facilities to meet their environmental, social, and governance goals. So I think it's not an either-or kind of situation, but solar especially is very compatible with other development goals that might come along to the county and the area. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions from the board? Tony?
So the development part of it, is done by developers. In my opinion, they're the ones that are going to determine how close people want to live to these things. So you guys seem like you have a lot of experience with these. What is the magic number? I mean, how close can you develop where people say, I don't want to live right there?
Yeah. As solar becomes new, I think this was mentioned before as a new thing, there may be some kind of reluctance in seeing it. After it comes into place with the vegetation management and so forth, I think it's very compatible. People will say, I want to live here. And there's not a big, having solar nearby is not a very big deal.
Have you done enough projects to know how long it takes to get that sense of I don't mind living by this?
Yeah, it's gonna vary depending on the area and how much that's come to be. In my county in Illinois, we don't have any large scale solar, but we do have 5, 6 wind farms, and I'd say within my local community, people don't even see the very large wind turbines anymore. Oh yeah, that's just kind of, it has blended into the background, just like, electric poles, telephone poles, and so forth. You don't see them anymore because you're just so used to them. So certainly when they first came into existence, everybody was like, wow, look at that. And now it's become, and I think wind has a much bigger visual impact than solar ever will.
Okay,
Are
Joe?
most of these projects built by national construction companies with local labor? Is that what you were saying before?
Yeah, typically the developer will contract with a construction firm that specializes in that, and then they will contract with local labor to be able to build a lot of the project. A lot of the civil work and labors is going to be common construction practices to put up the racking and so forth.
One of the concerns that was particularly noted at the town hall we had was the fact that the facility would be built in Kansas, but the power would go to Oklahoma. I don't know what we have against Oklahomans, but in general, how does it all goes into the grid, right? How does this work as far as local and non-local power?
And Kirk Sponsel, Deputy County Councilor, thank you for bringing that up. I would actually caution that where the energy goes not be considered at this point. There are potential federal implications for that type of analysis. So at this point, I would recommend that not be considered as part of the discussion.
All right, consider my question withdrawn. Any other questions? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have someone else who would like to speak? Name and address, please. First, 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Greg Braun. I live at 50 South Boulder Circle in Boulder, Colorado. I really appreciate you allowing me this time to speak about Invenergy's vegetation and land reclamation program. My professional background is in large-scale land reclamation and restoration ecology and land management, primarily on public lands in Colorado, where I've experienced managing over 150,000 acres and projects in the scale of several hundred to over 2,000 plus acres. Invenergy has a commitment to being a good steward of the land and a good neighbor to the local community, which is why we have developed a vegetation and management team of experts and a best-in-class vegetation and soil management program. Invenergy has the resources, team, and experience needed to manage grid-scale solar facilities well. Currently, we manage about 130 projects on more than 122,000 acres of land across the United States. And being a good steward to the land and a good neighbor to the local community is my personal goal as well. I come from a farming and ranching family, and I care deeply about the success and future of American farming and ranching communities. For all of our projects, we develop comprehensive vegetation and soil management plans designed to prevent erosion, revegetate the land, and to control invasive weeds. Our team of experts leverage their in-depth implementation knowledge to properly establish healthy vegetation that's site-specific and to identify long-term adaptive management programs. These plans include industry-leading best practices designed to preserve and protect topsoil for future agricultural use. Environmental assessments and frequent monitoring also occur. And regular mowing and invasive species management is regularly performed to ensure that the solar facility is safe and aesthetically pleasing. Site-specific landscape screening plans are created as needed to address viewshed concerns. And for your question earlier, those are typically about 40 foot from the array, 40 to 50 foot setback from the build. These projects are created and implemented with the help from local experts. This allows Invenergy to utilize their expertise and knowledge. And utilizing those local contractors also increases our ability to react quickly and to manage the site as needed. Solar farms provide a unique opportunity for landowners to rest the land and can be a part of a long-term crop rotation strategy, allowing soil health to improve. And then at the end of the solar farm lease, that facility can be decommissioned and the land returned to agricultural use or any other use that the landowner sees fit. The current existing zoning code regulations align well with Invenergy's vegetation management practices, and I think it's sufficient to protect the underlying resources in Sedgwick County. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, and there's also a little letter that I wrote if you're interested in learning a bit more about our program.
Your timing was perfect. Any questions? I have one, if not.
Sure.
So what is typical in one of these? Do you do like native restoration of prairie grasses, or do you just like put in something that can be cut for hay, or are any of these farms capable of being actively farmed around the solar panels, or is that too much of a risk to the equipment?
Outside of the facility, definitely farming can occur. Inside the facility, we typically plant native grasses and forbs. We like to try to include some pollinator habitat in there as well, so some flowering plants. We tend to try to use natives because they are shorter in stature, which reduces the shading on the panels and management costs. Also, those natives are, evolved for this ecosystem, so they don't need like irrigation water or fertilizer inputs for them to successfully establish and control the soil on site. And that also, we will of course use cover crops to do temporary stabilization of the soil as well. And then anytime we're going to salvage or move any type of soil, we make sure that we preserve the topsoil. So we strip that soil away, protect it, plant a cover crop on top of it, and then once the subgrading has occurred, we'll spread that topsoil back out on top so that there's still a viable seed bed for future agricultural use.
That sounds good. Joe, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just need to understand something.
Sure.
You lease a large area and then you have your setback within that area to get to your field. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you said, that actually the field was only maybe 35% of the actual leased land?
Yeah, that's very typical of our projects. The actual built area is substantially smaller than the total leased land.
Okay,
And
so-
part of that is for environmental concerns, because as we're citing exactly where those arrays are gonna go, we wanna make sure that we can avoid any impacts to like water or wetland resources or any type of wildlife resources that may be there.
So my question was, can you still farm that setback?
Yeah, absolutely. You can farm right. So we will place the facility fence 20 foot off of the solar array. And then farming can continue right up to the edge of that fence. Absolutely. Or grazing or whatever the land use is. Sure.
All right, any other questions for our speaker? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers from the public who would like to speak? Members of the public who would like to speak? Yes, sir. Name and address, 3 minutes, please.
Eugene Fields.
Speak into the microphone.
Eugene Fields is my name, 6728 North, 135th West, College mailing address. I want to make just a couple of comments for the people to think about. You know, there's a lot of emotion and agendas out there. You know, these people brought a lot of people in, a lot of educated people, bright people. You know, they're in the business to put in these facilities. And I don't have an issue with the facilities. And of course, I'm a citizen. I'm concerned about some of the facilities for a variety of reasons. But I think it's important to think about not what the agenda, you know, there's people that are really in love with solar. There's people that hate solar. I'm kind of neutral either way, you know, as far as that goes. But I think it's important for us to think about what's actually good for the county and the area, and understand a lot of educated people, and I've dealt with one or two of them directly. Nice people, but again, they're a business, and their goal is to put in something, and their goal is not necessarily in the best interest of the county themselves. So that's about all I've got to say. So thank you for your efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the speaker? All right. No, thank you. All right, anyone else from the public who would like to speak? All right, seeing none. Let's bring it back. Any other discussion by the board? All right, Justin?
Yeah, I had a question. Who organized all the experts to come here today?
That was Mitch.
I'm impressed.
Thank you. We did appreciate the chance to ask all the questions we could think of. All right, Justin?
Yeah, I would just echo Scott's point earlier that these are the four themes that arose from all of the research collected by staff. At this point, I would take any direct feedback or any kind of consensus on these four items particular. If you want to rank these, if you want to say we're not concerned about these, if there's anything that you would like to add that's not listed on the screen, I'd welcome that feedback.
All right, Joe?
I gave my opinion, just to reverse the last two.
Tony, do you have anything you need to say about this? I would just, I think you've narrowed it down from what I heard at the open house. This seemed to be the four most concerned. The setbacks seem like they might be the simplest thing to just come up with a number and be done with. The others, I suspect, are going to be a little more complex, but I would say we receive and file the information. Is there any, do you want something more specific from this committee, or is that enough to get you going? And
I think that's
keep
certainly
you-
enough. Yeah, I think we've
All right.
received a lot of good feedback today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I believe I'll move on to our next item on the agenda, event, because the recommended action for that one was receive and file, so we have done that. Number 4 on our agenda is event permits in the county, and Justin, you're up again.
Sure. So this item we did hear about on the 30th of November at our last meeting. Just to give you a quick recap, staff did conduct research on the state of practice of event permitting in the county. We did research on 5 counties in Kansas that were surveyed via email, phone calls, and review of their individual codes. The counties were chosen due to their similarities to Sedgwick County, both in size and urban-rural interface. Of the 5 counties surveyed, 4 of those did have performance standards. I'm not going to go through each of those individually, but just to give you a quick update, staff did present our findings to the Board of County Commissioners at their meeting on Tuesday, December 12th, so just 2 days ago. Again, this information that was presented to the Board of County Commissioners was the same information that was presented to the Advanced Plans Committee on November 30th. So we did get some good feedback on that. Kind of the general flow of that conversation. Again, we in the past kind of split up these 2 items as event permits in the county and event centers in the county. We did the same thing again with the Board of County Commissioners, but basically the general flow of the conversation sort of led to some of the same concerns. So unless there's any specific comments on event permits in the county, I can move on to event centers in the county and then go through some of those concerns that the Board of County Commissioners raised. Scott, did you have something to add?
I just don't want to jump in too soon. So will you provide some highlights from what the commissioners said about event centers in the county?
Certainly. The only reason why I'm moving forward to event centers in the county is because the way that our agenda was printed, I think event permits was listed first. Again, a lot of those same concerns were addressed in both categories, so I'm happy to sort of group both of those categories in the next item.
Sure. And I would just add real quick that this topic has come up because the commissioners during a staff meeting received a presentation about event centers in the county, so the physical centers. And the dialogue led to a conversation about, well, how do other entities just handle events that a particular property wants to put on without having a particular structure or zoning classification for it? And so there was discussion about how the city of Wichita handles it in general. There wasn't real super specific. And so that's really what's kind of led to this dialogue is if and how the county should manage events that would happen, not necessarily just the event centers themselves. So just the background on that. And yeah, that's all I wanted to share.
Can I interrupt? If you all are interested in remaining and listening to the rest of our meeting, you are more than welcome, but figuring that you all flew in from out of state, if you would like to head off and do something more productive for your own business, you're not required to stay. So thank you, though, for coming.
We have a lot of good shopping areas.
And really good restaurants. You'd be surprised. You need to explore some of them. Okay, so back to sort of event permits and event center. We're merging the 2 items a bit, but go ahead, Justin.
Sure. So again, event permits generally are specific event focused. So I'm having a block party, or I'm having a specific event for my business, or I'm closing down a street. It's event specific. Whereas agenda item number 6, event center in the county, is more of a fixed structure. So that's a wedding venue or a place to have a party out in the county. So again, we conducted this research separately, but in the case of event centers, we conducted research on the state of practice of event centers in the county, and we did survey 10 counties. Of those 10 counties, again, they were chosen due to their similarities with Sedgwick County. And of those 10 counties, only 2 of them, Wyandotte County and Riley County, had specific regulations for event centers. Again, staff presented our findings to the Board of County Commissioners on Tuesday, so 2 days ago. And this was the same information that was presented to all of you at your meeting on November 30th. And again, the 3 biggest topics that emerged from the Board of County Commissioners meeting was probably, to start off, was noise. When we were looking into some of these regulations and looking at best practices and comparing some of these other communities, a lot of them didn't necessarily have specific regulations to noise, while others did. When I say specific regulations, I'm talking about decibel level. So there were a few, I think it was Riley County that had theirs their decibel level at 65 decibels. I brought that information to the Board of County Commissioners, and there was some good general discussion about what is 65 decibels, what is 80 decibels, and there was just some general discussion amongst the group about potentially landing on that number, but more so looking at a decibel scale and determining what that actually is. So noise was probably a significant factor that was brought up at that meeting. And then the second thing that came up was the proximity to neighboring residences. And the debate was sort of whether or not there's a standard setback that shall be applied everywhere for event centers, or if it should be based on where the nearest residence is, kind of a sliding scale. You know, if it's an event center but there's a house right next to it, is that different than if there's no house or no building or no structure next to it at all? So there was some debate about whether or not we should have standard guidelines for setbacks for event centers, or if it's a case-by-case basis and whether or not that should be a sliding scale. And then finally, parking on county roads, dust was certainly a factor. Access by emergency vehicles, that came up. So I think there was a lot of concern about, it's an event, where are these vehicles going to be parked during the event? If there's several hundred individuals that attend, where are those vehicles going to go? How much dust is it going to kick up? How much noise is it going to be coming to and from the event at certain hours of the night? That was certainly something that was brought up as well. I would say those were the three main topics that were discussed, but there were also discussions regarding lighting, making sure that that lighting was kept to the subject property that was hosting the event. So again, a lot of the general concerns that were shared by the Advanced Plans Committee in our earlier discussions were also brought up by the Board of County Commissioners at their meeting 2 days ago. But I wanted to give you all an update on that and let you know that our next steps are probably going to be kind of similar to our last agenda item with solar. Start to look at some of those best practices, start to review some documents, and then start bringing forward some further information for all of you.
Okay, any questions for Justin? I have one, just from a regulatory definition perspective. Is it possible for an event center to need an event permit ever? Like if they did some special, I don't know, car show or something? Or is it by definition, if you've got a structure, you're never going to need an event permit?
I would offer that in general, if you have the zoning that allows you to do an event center, that you would not need an event permit. Now, at this time, the county does not have event permits, so that's not even a possibility. So we'll have to see what happens in the future.
Okay, just a thought. Always seeking potential confusion. Any other questions for Justin on this topic?
I will add that a lot of the research that was done on this topic is included in your agenda packet, and some of those best practices that we started looking into has also been included. So if you want to take a look at that and provide any feedback at any point, please do.
All right, thank you. All right, do we need to do anything else on this topic, or are we ready to receive and file? And I see nods, so. All right, I believe we now move on to item 6. Are we done with event center as well as event permit?
Yes.
All right, short-term rental.
Sure.
Scott.
Yeah, and if it's okay, is it all right if I just sit here and take you through it? Because I think this will just be a quick item.
I'm for it.
Okay. In terms of short-term rentals, so it was lumped into this conversation about event centers, because there are event centers in the county that are have offered short-term rentals. Same issue as what happened in the city has occurred, where the zoning code does not allow for stays shorter than 7 days in rural residential. So that creates an issue for quite a few of the properties in the county, unincorporated county. So the county commission has brought up the question about what should be done with short-term rentals. They've looked at the Wichita model in terms of the regulations. We then, staff went out and did a survey of the same 10 counties that were contacted for event centers in the county. And so we've got information on that, but we need to actually dial it in a little bit more. Because what we found is that when we did the research, we asked if they had specific regulations that related to short-term rentals. And in many cases, the answer was no. But I think we need to go back and double check is that our answer would be no, we don't have specific regulations in the unincorporated county for short-term rentals. But they would still be, they're still prohibited in our county. And I think we need to do that double check to make sure what are the implications of what their code says today, whether or not they've got short-term rentals listed. So we're gonna bring that back because we think that that's really key information. Now, we have received feedback from the staff meeting that at least one of the commissioners feels that this is a high priority issue because they're hearing from constituents that they would like to be able to offer this service and they can't legally right now. So we'll see how this evolves, but we're going to continue to do more research and hopefully get a sense from the county about what their preference is. But we will be leaning on you as well to tell us what you think is a good fit for the community.
Thank you. Any questions for Scott? John?
Scott, to iterate on the urgency of this issue, it came up in a meeting that I was in here about 2 weeks ago. Strange as it may be, a person wanting to borrow money at the bank for an event center in the county, and we had to delay it because we didn't know where we were at.
In terms, I guess, one thing that I would add is that there is a moratorium on solar. So we've talked about an item that has a moratorium. When it comes to event centers in the county, there is no moratorium. And in fact, you will be reviewing a case even today about an event center. When it comes to short-term rentals, they are generally prohibited by the zoning code in rural residential zoning, which is the most of the unincorporated county. However, folks still have the option of requesting a rezoning to even say a PUD, a custom zoning, if they wanted to proceed with a project even today. So there's nothing that say there's not a moratorium. There's not something that says it won't be considered. They still have avenues to address the zoning.
I would just say I agree with whichever commissioner it was. I don't think we were putting the platform, the technology back in the bottle, and people want the service of short-term rentals. They want to provide the service of short-term rentals, and I think we need to adjust the county zoning to reflect that reality and just deal with them however they choose to deal with them. Any other questions for Scott? All right, that one is also then received and filed, and we are now at item 7 on the agenda, Airport Hazard Zoning Code Update. Justin, didn't even bother to sit down.
No, that's fine. Not a problem. So Airport Hazard Zoning Code Update, we discussed this item back at our November 30th meeting. But again, just wanted to provide you with a little bit of a recap of why we're doing it and where we are in the process. So the Airport Hazard Zoning Code limits hazards that endanger the lives and property around Wichita airports. The primary purpose of the code is to limit the height of the structures around the airports, and that's based on the assigned hazard zone. So the code was first adopted back in 1955 and later amended again in 1983 and 1995. There hasn't been too much work done to the code since 1995. So back in October of 2023, just a few months ago, the city contracted with Kaufman Associates to draft an updated airport height and hazard zoning ordinance. Kaufman Associates will work with staff to review and assess our current code and see how that is implemented in respect to our current airport land use compatibility. So with input from staff, Kaufman Associates will develop the final ordinance. And thus far, we held a kickoff meeting with Kaufman on November 13th, and we had a follow-up meeting to that November 13th meeting on December 5th. The point of that December 5th meeting was to review our existing regulations and administrative processes, how we review those applications coming in to determine if modifications are needed to familiarize the consultant with our processes. So basically, it was kind of, the first one was a meet and greet. Second one, we're starting to dive into what our existing regulations and existing processes are. I just wanted to give you a brief update on kind of where we are with it. Again, the final goal would be to continue having these discussions with you, continue providing updates, as well as the Planning Commission. And then as the ordinance develops, we will bring that to consideration to the Planning Commission, Sedgwick County Commission, and Wichita City Council, respectively, during the first quarter of 2024. So again, just kind of a brief update on where we stand with everything and provide you a little bit of background on that particular subject.
Thank you. Did the topic of drones come up at your last meeting?
We didn't specifically bring up drones, but it is certainly noted. I know that we will be bringing that up with Kaufman Associates. I'm sure that they do have some experience with that technology now, but I do appreciate you bringing it up again.
Well, I was just curious what, if anything, they said about it, as in throwing up their hands and saying, "That's not our job."
I can certainly provide you with an update on that.
All right, I'll be curious. All right, any questions for Justin on the airport hazard zoning code update? In that case, that's received and filed. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
And we're at item 8 on the agenda, project updates. Scott?
Sure. It's been a robust meeting, so in the interest of time, I'm not going to take you through this page by page. I would just note that we continue to be very busy, and it looks like we're closing out the year with some significant numbers in terms of cases that you all have reviewed, and also subdivision cases, number of lots. We continue to see churn in our employment, number of employees that we have here in the planning department. And so we have a couple of retirements coming up next year. So we have Neil and Kathy Wilson will be retiring next year. So just something to look at. And then good news on the HR front, retirements are good news, but it's a challenge in terms of finding folks, because we'll never find them that can totally replace them. It's just a matter of how do we fill those slots. But the good news is that one of our positions, the senior planner for advanced plans, will be featured on, I believe, KWCH as part of like a regional announcement. So that's pretty fun. In terms of projects, the text provides you with the latest updates on most of those. I would just highlight that we have the first meeting of the College Hill Neighborhood Plan Steering Committee this evening. So we're excited to get that project underway.
All right, thank you. Any questions, any comments? All right, thank you. And do we have any members of the public here? We'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, public input. Is anyone here from the public would like to speak on general topics? Seeing none, our next meeting is December 28th, Thursday, 10 a.m. in this location. I hope to see you all there.
I have
John?
one question. We asked for a submission of comments, and we asked for them by 5 o'clock the day before the meeting. Is it possible to get them 5 o'clock the day before the meeting, so you can get them to us the day before the meeting?
If that would be possible, I would personally find it a little more helpful. It's hard sometimes to squeeze them in on that.
I'll tell you what, if we could have a little more time to look into that and get back to you with an answer. I do have to say, we've had a very busy week this week, and so I do apologize that we did receive written comments from folks who had spoke today. We didn't get those emailed and turned around to you because we got them in a time period where it was after the packet had already gone out, but before this meeting. But we have just been slammed this week, so I apologize for not
I
getting
can't
those out.
imagine why that would happen during the holidays, for heaven's sakes, no.
To me, that would help you as well.
It would, yes, sir.
We'll wait to hear what's possible and what's not possible, but it would be nice if it could be arranged. Okay, any other comments, anything else? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.